and got it. Working with Jamila is like truly one of the highlights of my life. I was very, very sad to not continue to work with her. And I will say, I think most of the things that have been built at Cal State Fullerton are down to Jamila's like ability to frankly just get shit done in really impressive and awesome ways. So I'm a huge fan of her and her work, and also of everyone at DEFCon. So I'm going to do a screen share. I'm also aware of how dirty my camera is because it's refracting light in weird ways. So you can look at my slides and then not at my weird camera angle situation. Okay, cool. So thank you for having me. And I think thank you to DEFCon broadly for providing a space for us to think about the ways in which pedagogy and the digital can intersect, and can especially intersect in the space of ethnic studies. I think this is one of the most exciting projects that we have seen recently for actually like making change happen in the academy. And so I'm always really excited to be in a room with other folks who are sort of involved in this. I'm going to start with some other thanks also, particularly to my collaborators at Bates, particularly Dr. Sue Houchins, who was one of the first people at Bates, which is the college that I teach at and where I'll be sort of situating my talk today. She was the first person to call for attention to be paid to the histories that my class focuses on. And she was for many, many years roundly ignored. Thanks also to Joe Hall, who teaches sort of a parallel class to mine, and Emma Solar, who is a Bates alum who wrote an incredible thesis on the history of Bates and slavery. And then also thank you to the 116 students who have taken this class with me over the past 4 years and who have contributed to this work. It's been a lot of fun to do this, and I could not have done it without them. I'm here today to talk about how I introduce students to tools that help them better understand and then publicly share institutional histories of racism. And I'm going to get into some of the pedagogical specifics because I think it really helps to like concretize this stuff. But the shortest version of my talk is this. The most effective way that I have found to get students to thoughtfully engage with the digital tools is to link those tools to questions that are relevant to students. And at the moment, the things that seem to be most relevant to the students that I'm talking about are how to, and indeed whether it's even possible, to ethically engage with institutions of higher education. So I'm going to start by just kind of explaining what Bates is and what we do and what our history is, and then talk a bit about the course. I'm going to highlight 2 different kinds of assignments, very briefly talk about how this work fits into some broader conversations about slavery and higher education, and then come back to the work that students have done in this course, and especially how their critical engagement with and critique of the college has manifested. So Bates is a small liberal arts college located in what is now called Lewiston, Maine, on unceded Wabanaki land. And so we are about here in this map of New England. Bates was founded as the Maine State Seminary in 1855 by a dude named Orrin Cheney, who was a Free Will Baptist and zealous and longstanding abolitionist. The college's promotional materials really lean into this history. They haven't always, but in the past, let's say 20 years or so, they have spent a lot of time emphasizing this origin story. Quote, since its founding in 1855 by Maine abolitionists, Bates College has welcomed men and women from diverse racial, ethnic, religious, economic, and social backgrounds. So this is a more complicated story than appears in the Bates mission statement. And it's more complicated for some very particular reasons. In the 19th century, when a bunch of small schools were trying to find their financial footing, Orrin Cheney went around to a bunch of people and asked them for money to secure the future of the Maine State Seminary. At the time, Lewiston was primarily a mill town, and it primarily produced cloth. The most notable of these mills was owned by Benjamin Bates, who throughout the 19th century purchased cotton that was grown and harvested by enslaved people. That cotton was then converted into cloth by a number of vulnerable workers, including children. And through these various forms of labor exploitation, Benjamin Bates was able to turn a profit and secure excess capital. And it was that surplus money that Orrin Chaney sought and secured for the college. So over the course of his life, Benjamin Bates donated $200,000 to the college. And in 1864, the Maine State Seminary was officially renamed Bates College. And I'll say, just with my historian hat on, and because I know there are art historians in the audience, neither of these images is from the 19th century. The one on the left is from the early 20th century ad for Benjamin Bates, one of his mills. And this ad really turns on the fact that it's good cotton because of this history of slavery. And the other picture is from the early 20th century, and it was part of an attempt to sort of bring attention to child workers. But the caption for this image, outside of one of the Lewiston mills, is some of the youngest workers in the mills. And it's just, I find it to be a kind of harrowing image. So we have this tension that was exemplified, I think, really beautifully by Emma Solar, who was class of 2020, in an honors thesis. And she reflected on Bates's donation to the college, writing that, quote, "The key irony in this deceivingly simple history is that Bates, a textile manufacturer, partially dependent on slave-produced cotton, was funding an abolitionist school." So I'm telling you all of this as sort of background, but when I began teaching this class, the syllabus of which is linked here, I was really just looking for some archives to work with. I love collaborating with institutional archives. I think it gives students an opportunity to think about what an archive is. They often have really rich, cool resources. And one of the arguments that I'm going to make here today is that even though the particularities of this class are specific to Bates, I think a lot of the work that I do in it could be ported into other environs as well. Many colleges have these institutional records, and these institutional records raise a whole bunch of questions for what our institutions do in the present. So the first time I taught this class, I worked with some oral histories that were produced by mill workers. But the second time I was looking to sort of like revamp the class. And I was at a talk, and a colleague of mine said, and I'm going to paraphrase here, that we know how much money Benjamin Bates gave to the college, but we don't really know what that money meant. And furthermore, like, we could never really know. So we couldn't know what it meant in terms of other donations. We couldn't know where the money came from. And as a historian who works with a lot of historical data, it struck me that we probably could know, and that we could begin to ask some questions about the origins of Bates's money specifically, and about the broader context of philanthropic donations to the college. So, as I said, the archival orientation of this course sort of began just by me looking around for an archive to collaborate with. But what I've come to understand as I've taught this course over the past 4 years is that the institutional critique aspect of the course that currently exists isn't a bonus. It's a necessary part of the lessons that I'm trying to teach about power and data analysis. But furthermore, it's a thing that keeps students coming back and gets them really invested in the questions of the course, right? Because we are thinking not about abstract ideas implemented somewhere else. We're thinking about what this means for our institution. So the goals of the class are fivefold. A lot of them are about data literacy. So to think about how data sets are constructed, how they're always subjective, to make a plan for moving from archives to data, to differentiate between different kinds of approaches, like scholarly approaches to working with data, to understand how we do this using a programming language. We use the language R. But I think most importantly, to translate the learning and work of the class into informed civic action in pursuit of social justice. And I've come to understand that I think that last piece is really the thing that makes this class work. I am really happy later to talk about what it means for me to do this work at Bates, but I'm going to say, just as an aside, that despite a lot of anxiety on campus about work focusing on Bates's history, I have never received any pushback from anyone in any kind of a position of power about this work. I do hear frequently that somebody might be worried about it. So I'll hear from the dean of the faculty's office that they're worried that the fundraising people will be concerned, or that the fundraising people are worried that the president will be concerned, but nobody seems to actually be concerned. They just seem to think that other people might be. I will also say that my colleague, Dr. Houchins, has been banging this drum about Bates's history and the ways in which the story that we tell about being an abolitionist school doesn't fully capture it. She has been making this argument for decades. And it is not surprising to her, and it's not surprising to me, that when a white woman comes in and tells the same story that she has been telling for a long time, that story gets picked up with greater rapidity than it ever did when she was asking for this story to be told. So my identity at Bates obviously informs how safe it is for me to tell these stories, but I think that probably many of us could push more on our institutions than maybe we feel like it's safe to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the course is structured, and then I'll move into assignments. We use two different archival sort of document sets in this course. The first are the cotton purchase orders that the Bates Mill Company issued. So the mills are based in Lewiston. Some of them were also based in Lowell, Massachusetts, but they purchased cotton from throughout the US South. The second, and that's the image on the left. So the cotton invoices are the image on the right. The image on the left are the lists of donors to the college in its early years. Using these archives, which contain handwritten records from the 19th century, is another really essential part of how this course comes together. So it helps to illustrate the ways that any kind of data work is necessarily reductive. We're always in this kind of computational humanities work, and indeed any computational work, taking complex experiences and making them less complex so that we can render them machine readable. And I really want students to leave my class knowing that this kind of behind the scenes work of narrowing and standardization is always happening, and that we need to pay attention to where it's happening if we want to see how power is being reproduced or challenged in our data. And just as a plug, I think that this piece by Trevor Munoz and Katie Rawson is one of the best, but it's about sort of what data cleaning means and the values and assumptions baked into the idea that one can have clean data, and also quite a lot about the labor of standardizing data. I think it's great, and I think that everyone should read it. So another sort of important feature of this class is that we think a lot about the different shapes that data can take. So there's a presentation here that I actually put together as part of working as a mentor, a DEFCon mentor, which is an experience that is extraordinary and a lot of fun. And I recommend that everyone does, because you get to hang out with just like an amazing scholar interlocutor for a semester and talk to them frequently. And that's just like, what could be better than that? But the focus of the course on literal structures of data, that is a list of numbers or a table or related tables, does a couple of things for me. The first is that because students see data in these sort of naturalized forms pretty frequently, like they're used to seeing Excel spreadsheets, having to go from an archive to a spreadsheet helps them to imagine the kind of work that people who are creating data are doing on a day-to-day basis. I think it's also the case that a lot of institutional records are already structured in ways that lend themselves to these kinds of analyses. So there are probably at every institution, somewhere, a list of donors to that institution. There's data about student attendance. There's data about how attendance has changed over time. There's data about courses. And a lot of it is structured in some pretty unpredictable ways. And so I found that focusing on what the data is and how it is structured, and then what questions we can ask in those structures, helps students to connect something that might seem really hard to imagine, like how do we do an analysis on 19th century handwriting, to sort of how can we use this data to push on the college in helpful ways. So each week, in a very practical way, we meet some new quantitative methodologies, we meet new data structures, and we watch videos on these concepts before class. Students come to class, we talk about them, we work in pairs to practice what we've learned, and then we apply it to the institutional data. So again, sort of in a nuts and bolts way, I ask students to write code together. It's called paired programming, and basically all of the research on both their knowledge acquisition and the output suggests that working together to develop code is better than working alone. During the pandemic, I mean, I say that like we're not still in it, but in the early years of the pandemic, when it was sort of horrifying to think about students like typing together on computers, I started using a collaborative notebook environment called Saturn Notebooks, which I'm hoping will load. And I will say, I'm happy to share any of these resources with folks if you just email me, or I'm findable on Twitter. I'm the only Anelise Shrout anywhere. So this is a collaborative notebook. And so that means that two students can work in it at the same time. So it's like a Google Doc, but for code. So students have these notebooks to work through every week. I built them. They're highly structured. So they ask students to like implement concepts and write definitions. And then after they've done some practicing, they apply those skills to our data. So there's always a transcription element in the class every week. So moving from that handwritten archive to machine readable data. So this is just one from week 2. I have them practice with data I give them, and then I have them implement their own. One thing that I want to call attention to is that early in iterations of this class, I asked students to collaborate, but wasn't really giving them prompts or skills about how to, and it was predictably not going that well. So we talk a lot about what good collaboration looks like in class, but I also ask students at the very beginning of every assignment to write on their own, it's up here, about what worked well in previous collaborations, what they wish they had done differently in previous collaborations, any points of friction, and then how that changes the ways that they might want to approach collaboration going forward. And so this is helpful for me because I can I get flagged when a collaboration is going badly, because one student will write, I felt like I did all the work, or I own up to the fact that I did none of the work, or my colleague worked too fast, or like they refused to meet when I wanted to. So it's helpful as a check for me on balancing work in pairs, but it also asks students to think a lot about what good collaboration looks like and what feels good for them. And I think that kind of practice over the course of the semester makes them better collaborators in the future, which is just a thing we often ask them to do, but don't actually teach them how to do. I'm happy to talk about that also in the Q&A. So broadly, every week we think about a particular data structure. We think about the questions that we can answer using that data structure. We learn some quantitative concepts to go along with that structure and those questions. We learn some R syntax. We practice that syntax. We do it all over again. I want to show you some talk more particularly about what those assignments look like. So I'm going to go back here. Okay. So I have two sort of genres of assignments, each of which works with one of the archives. So the first looks at these donor records. So as Orrin Cheney was wandering around soliciting money from any number of people, including Benjamin Bates, he got a lot of donations from people in New England. And we have those lists. And this is a picture of one of those lists. So students use these lists to think about working with two-dimensional data, i.e. a table, and to consider the kinds of inferences that we can draw from that information, and then also how that information shapes our understanding of the college in the present. So step one is transcribing these ledgers into a spreadsheet. And this process is quite fraught with peril for students. It requires considerable interpretation. 21st students aren't familiar with 19th century names, for example. They're not familiar with abbreviations. Many of them can't read cursive, though I'm seeing that change. But even if they can write in cursive, reading this handwriting can be really difficult. So we actually now, I run a cursive language module where I bring in individual fountain pens and we practice writing letters in the style of the 19th century, which I think does help. But navigating these handwritten documents is always a source of frustration. And I think that is productive frustration, because students realize quickly how something they'd assumed would be really easy, right? Taking a structured table of rows that include information in different columns and converting that into a structured CSV file. So they assume that will be relatively easy. This looks like a spreadsheet, but it requires them to do research. It requires them to make guesses. It requires them to infer some things about names in the past. And hopefully this sticks with them so that when they're looking at other kinds of data in the future, they will remember that this process of making educated guesses was behind a lot of data collection that they then sort of can present as being relatively more refined. We use these records to begin to ask questions that tell us something about who the early leaders of the college might have felt indebted to, right? These are people who literally are giving their money to make the college continue to exist. And everything we know about the history of philanthropy suggests that the interests of those donors would have been paramount to their early leadership. So we ask questions like, did a greater number of donations come from a particular place? This is, by the way, sort of a t-test question, if we want to talk about statistics. What about the total number of donations? What is the distribution of different donation amounts? And so we can use these questions, which get into some sort of basic statistical concepts like normal distributions versus distributions that are not normal, or mechanisms for comparing different sets of numbers. But we're always bringing them back to what does this tell us about the early years of the college? And what does this make us think about who the college imagines its constituents to be? I think at a very basic level, this kind of work reminds students that donors are often imagined by people at the college and imagine themselves to be the true constituents of institutions. Students also use this kind of an archive to begin to ask more complicated questions that require more research. So the 1860s, these records are from the 1850s. The 1860 census includes information about the total household wealth of a person, if that person is the head of the household and also male. It includes information about how people were gendered or raced by census takers. And this opens up a whole conversation about, do we feel good trusting the 1860 census, which we know at least encoded race in some really white supremacist ways? Do we think that ascribing a particular gender identity to a person in the past is an ethical or reasonable thing to do? And I think for students who don't like the idea of telling somebody what their gender is, this notion of taking government data and applying it to people in the past raises some questions. And we don't necessarily say we can't use any of this information, but it makes them think about what it means to sort of trust government sources and how we want to write about what we're doing in ways that convey to our readers or our viewers that a lot of these identities are mediated through a bunch of different power structures. So that's sort of one set of assignments. Another set uses the Bates Mill Company records. And I think that these are some of the most powerful records that we have. I'm also very lucky that we have access to them. Not every institution will have access to the financial paperwork of their main backer, but we do, and so I like to use them. So these are records of cotton purchased by the Bates Mill Company, and they include where the cotton was purchased, in this case, New Orleans, when it was purchased. They also include weights of every individual bale of cotton purchased. And I want to come back to that. Other information that they have that is relevant to us is that they include the names of brokers. So the way that cotton purchasing worked in the 19th century was brokers in ports and also sort of just central locations in places that produced cotton would buy cotton from a number of plantations, would aggregate it and then sell it on. And so we know that some of the people who were doing that aggregating included several trustees of Bates College, included some people who have streets named after them around the campus. And I think that's important for us to know and for students to think about, because there is a tendency, especially at my institution, to say, yes, well, we know that Benjamin Bates gave this donation, but there were a bunch of other donations. And really, if we just deal with the fact that he was connected to the cotton economy, we don't have to worry about any of the other people. And what research from this class has shown is that actually quite a lot of people who gave money to the college, quite a lot of people who facilitated the college's financial health were implicated in this economy. This is not surprising for those of us who think with the 19th century. Almost everybody, many people in the United States in this period were implicated in the violence of slavery. But I think it really helps to make that visible, that we can't just sort of address one problematic donor and then not pay attention to any of the rest of them. I wanted to come back to the bales. So each invoice contains a representation of the weight of a bale of cotton. Cotton bales were on average meant to weigh 500 pounds. And looking at the individual weights of individual bales lets us begin to think about the real human impact of the cotton industry, right? What did it mean that enslaved people were forced to pick 50 pounds of cotton a day? What does that mean for their bodies? What does that mean for fatigue? And pairing these kinds of questions with quantitative data and quantitative skills helps students to see that no calculation is neutral, right? We're never separated from the violence of the past, even if we render that violence into like very convenient numbers on a computer. I will also say in this class, we talk a lot about data and power. Our main text is Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein's Data Feminism. It's a great book. I also highly recommend this. It is a really thoughtful rendering of how data intersects with sexism and white supremacy and colonialism in the everyday world. And I think it's incredibly readable for undergraduates. I also like to give it to various adults in my life who are grappling with some of these ideas. So a lot of the things that I've said, I think won't be shocking to folks in this room. But I have found that pairing the focus on our institution with the sort of quantitative skills really helps to drive home the ways in which data often operates as a way to enact power, and also helps them to think about how they might use the skills that they're seeing in my classroom in other spaces. And I will also say that the work of Marisa Fuentes and Jessica Marie Johnson, especially thinking about the ways that archives and data have power, is foundational to this course. Sometimes we read some of their work and sometimes I summarize and we talk about it, but they have to have a slide and a thank you to them. So we spend a lot of time in the class thinking about how Bates is situated in this longer history, and there's, I think, a fair amount to say about this. A lot of institutions are thinking about how they are implicated in histories of slavery and white supremacy. If you're interested in this, Craig Stephen Wilder's book, Ebony and Ivy, I think is a really excellent place to look, as is the work at Rutgers that doctors Deborah Gray White and Marisa Fuentes have done, as is Sharon Leon's work on Georgetown. But I think my small plug for thinking about this kind of thing at your own institution is that a lot of the extant work has been about institutions that used enslaved labor to build their campuses, or where the founders enslaved people themselves. And I think one of the things that this work shows is that even institutions that were not built with enslaved labor or by enslaved laborers still have these connections that it's worth excavating. What I really want to talk about, though, is the work that students have done. So students have done a lot with this course. One student created a set of infographics to go up around campus, trying to visceralize, that's a term from data feminism, the amount of labor that was required to produce enough cotton so that Benjamin Bates could amass the surplus capital to donate money to the college. And so this student really wanted to think about actual person hours and actual lifetimes of labor required. And so he made these to be put up around campus. And I think he put some of them up. This was also the pandemic semester, so many plans about physical instantiations just did not come to fruition. Other students have sort of gone beyond the archives of the course and undertook some surveys of fellow students, wanting to know if students knew more about this history before they applied to Bates, if they still would have come. So a lot of Bates's marketing at the moment talks about our abolitionist history. And Bates was a school founded by abolitionists. And a lot of people, I think, interpret that in exactly the way that our recruitment office intends, as this is a school that does not have a racism problem. Students then come to Bates and find out that that's not true because we are a predominantly white institution and for a number of other reasons. But one of the concerns that I keep hearing is, oh, if we talk about this, students won't apply. And what Perla and Alia found in their sample of students is that if we talked about this, actually students would still apply and they would still come and they would trust the institution more because they would not feel lied to upon their arrival. This particular piece of information has made it all the way up to our Dean of Admissions, who has begun to think about how we might change some of the promotional material around these stories. So that's a way in which like the work of this course has concretely shaped what Bates is doing. And that was all work by these two incredible students. Other students have done things like look into the geography of donations to the college, and they found that even these small donations that didn't come from Benjamin Bates were from people who were still involved in either cotton production or in the building of boats that moved cotton up and down the East Coast. So again, the story of like, well, if we deal with this one donor, we like attend to the problem of Benjamin Bates, we don't have to worry about any other institutional violence. Turns out not to be true, and that's a point that students make over and over and over again. I haven't formally evaluated this course. I've just been teaching it. But a thing that I have noticed, and I guess like my big takeaway, is that students across Bates since before the pandemic, but in a very pronounced way since the start of the pandemic, have begun to ask really pointed questions about the institution, and they've been really looking to use data to do so. And in the course of this class, they ask a lot of questions. How can I collect data to push on this thing? I really want to know about our current funding structure, which is totally opaque. There's no sense of who the dominant donors are today. That information is not public, but students want to know about it, and they've started to ask. I've also seen them ask other questions about like campus life, about who on campus is formally charged with various crimes, about sort of campus safety broadly. And they go to data, but then they think a lot about how that data is socially constructed. So it's been really neat to see them think about data collection as a form of activism, and about how they always need to be very critical about the data that they collect. So it's been a lot of fun. And it's generally my sense that without the institutional critique piece, this class would work a lot less well. So Bates is pretty typical of predominantly white institutions in the United States. In some ways, we are small and we're also very wealthy. So in that way, we are not typical of many institutions, but I think the fact of our predominant whiteness is fairly typical. The fact that we have lots of donors in our past is pretty typical. And the fact that we are implicated in white supremacy and colonialism is pretty typical. And I think asking questions about those connections is really helpful. And students really seem to want to do it. I think giving students a space and the tools to do that work has been really fun for me. And also that learning to see and critically react to those histories can be really fraught. It can be fraught for students, it can be fraught for faculty, and it can be fraught for staff. But I think that building a course around these institutional questions has been really effective. And so I would encourage folks to think about this kind of approach in their own institutions. And I'm really happy to talk about nuts and bolts and just like how I put this class together in the Q&A, because I've now talked for too long. I'm going to stop. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for talking. I think we will go ahead and open it up to questions from the crowd. You can post your questions in the chat, or you could raise your hand. And yes, I see, Rupsi, you have a question.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, this was amazing, Anelise. Thank you so much. My question is, so, what would you, it sounds like when you were doing this, it was in a context where at least there had been some people at your institution who were wanting this work to happen. What would you suggest for someone who's working in an institution where maybe there hasn't been prior advocacy on this point, or maybe they're worried about hostility at the institution?
Yeah. So I'm very lucky because this is a place where nobody seems to be very bothered that I'm undertaking this work. But I think that a place to begin is just to see what kind of collections your local archives have. So I should say I work with the college archives, the Muskie Archives and Special Collections, and also with the Lewiston Public Library, which is the place that all of the Bates Mill Company paperwork is held. And before I knew that this would be a relatively safe thing to do, I just started to think about, like, how can we transcribe or process some of this information, and then sort of tiptoed into, like, well, what kinds of questions can we ask based on this? And so I think that can be a good and okay place to begin. I will also say, not for everyone in academia, certainly, but for many of us who hold positions of relative privilege, it can be really easy to assume that things are risky when they are in fact not very risky at all. And so I've talked to a lot of colleagues who have said, like, oh, well, this is a very dangerous thing to do. You might upset the trustees. I don't believe the trustees care that much about what happens in my class in this particular way. I think they care broadly, but I don't think they care about, like, the actual things I'm teaching on a day-to-day basis, in that they would intervene to stop it. But I think a lot of us talk ourselves out of doing work because it feels like it might be risky. And especially those of us who are on the tenure track might do well to think about the places that we can push, which is not an answer to Ripsi's question, because I think that there are people for whom it is actually risky. But I think it's worth it to pause and wonder about, like, where those risks are. I think another place that I would begin if I were at a totally different institution is by talking to students about the questions that they want to ask. And coming at this class rather from the place of having a fixed archive that I'm working with to, so that sentence like got away from me, rather than coming at this class from a fixed place, coming at it from a place of, like, what questions do you have and how might we go about collecting that data? It would be a flipped structure. And I think there are some things about that would be really difficult, because you sort of going into a class not knowing what might be out there can be really hard. But I think for a module or a small assignment on data literacy, just the question of what do you want to know and how do you think we would know it can be a really powerful first step.
Thank you. Are there, I saw another, yes, Catherine.
First off, this is amazing. Hi, good to see you. Thank you so much for sharing this work. My mind is blown in all kinds of ways. My question is really basic, like, how do you start to scope a course like this? Because you're threading in so many things. You know, you've got data feminism that digs into some of the historical context and lays us through structures of power, but maybe isn't spending a lot of the time working in the time period that you're looking in. You've got primary source literacy down to the level, I appreciate the granularity in which you talk about how you stitch the course together. But I'm curious, just, how have you calibrated where you need to go deep, where you can summarize things, what's important scholarship to have, what's essential scholarship to have students engaging with, and then the whole other layer of primary source literacy and data literacy. It's a lot.
Yes. So I'm clicking because I'm going to pull up the structure of this course, which I'm also happy to share with anyone. Some of you have seen me pull this up before because it's a little bit ridiculous. So for every day, I have a set of learning outcomes, and they're color coded, what learning outcome is or learning objective. I always swap outcomes and objectives when I'm talking about this. Just I'm the goals. So what we're doing each day, the videos and readings that support that, and assignments that relate back to it. And I do this, I can actually just drop the link to this in the chat. That's probably easier. I do this because otherwise I cannot keep all of the pieces going that are required to make this course work. My colleague Turi Pickens sat me down a couple of years ago and said, like, make a list of everything you want to have happen in the course, map that out concretely, and then build the course around it in sort of a backwards design methodology. And it has been the best thing I have ever done for this class. The first time that I taught it, I just had students working with the data, and I started to see places where like they either needed more context or where I had assigned just way too much reading. And so I've been doing a lot of paring back since then. So there's like a not very fun answer, which is like, do it once and see what fails and then do it better. And I am in a position of privilege because I can do that and have it be part of my tenure narrative. If I were a visiting faculty member, if I were an adjunct, if I were contingent, I would probably feel much less comfortable taking risks to fail in the class than I do in my current position. I think in that case, what I would do is start small with sort of 1 or 2 modules. Think about, is the goal of the course data literacy? And then maybe like the signature project is going to be some small amount of analysis on a data set that I already know. Is the point of the course the history of education? Well, then maybe I'll fit in these archives and have us do some transcription along the way. So I think to some degree, it depends on what the aim of the course is. But if you have the time and the energy, being able to map out those like day-to-day learning objectives has been, I think, for me, a game changer.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments? I have one, but I will cede my turn if there's another. Robert, I think.
You're not muted, but we can't hear you, Robert. This is my favorite part of Zoom.
Yeah. Let's see. Can you want to type it, or you, okay. Robert's going to type. I'm going to throw my question out there then, which is one thing, and to echo everyone else, I just love the way that you broke it down, because I think that these courses can feel, for the instructor as well, very kind of big and complex, and you're teaching a lot of layered ways of thinking through kind of data. And I'm wondering, I noticed that you weave between kind of really emphasizing there's the hard skills about understanding data structures and how to code with R to be able to do the data analysis. And then there's the soft skills about understanding why it takes 2 people to learn and effectively, apply these things, or team building and even penmanship. And, I'm wondering if you can talk a little more about kind of weaving these hard and soft skills into one course, because I think that for students in particular, when they see like something that is has a digital emphasis, they think right away only about the technology and maybe less about some of these soft skills that enable them to more effectively work with the technology.
Yeah, so I will say yes to all of the things you've said. And I'm in a program that is interdisciplinary and at a school that has no computer science program. So I get a lot of students who assume that what I'm doing is computer science and then are like grievously disappointed because I'm not a computer scientist. But so I do, for those students who come in expecting lots of technical skills, and who are sort of resistant to the idea of paired programming or sort of critically thinking about data. To borrow a phrase from a colleague of mine, I treat the whole semester as an advertisement for my particular pedagogical approach. So I lean really heavily into all of the scholarship, and here are some citations, tells us that collaboration is actually really important. It's important for how you think, it's important for your success in future jobs. it's really important. And so we're going to do it in this class. I talk a lot about the ways in which having unrepresentative data causes harm. So, and like in the world of AI and machine learning, there are just like new examples every day to draw from. But I think saying, we're talking about how data is constructed so that you know what to look for when you're moving into a data-centered field. So a lot of those sort of connections, I think students really respond to. I also get students who think that they are technically like unskilled. And so they're really afraid to come in. They've never taken a computer science class before. They have been in classes where they've been told that they don't know what to do. They've been told by society that they are not what a programmer looks like. And for them, and then also for the resistant students, I think it helps to talk about how the critical skills are actually the most important and difficult thing that we're doing. Learning syntax is not easy, especially if you're like me and you can't memorize things that well, but it is the easiest thing that we do. Thinking about the critical application is the most difficult thing that we do. So I just build it in every week. It's never an add-on, and it's always, we've analyzed this data, and you now need to think about knowing what we know from that analysis changes how you see the institution. That's the question I keep coming back to. I will also say I've abandoned letter grading. And so students submit something. If they've made a good faith effort to start it, they can revise it. And a good faith effort can be like, I opened the document. Like, it's a pretty low bar. And they can revise as many times as they need to. Students tend to not need to revise more than once. And I found that sort of gets me away from this problem of like, did I do it right? Did I do exactly what you want? Rather than practicing it. So that was not the most concise way of describing competency-based grading, but I do competency-based grading, and it's made a huge difference for me because the way that this course operates requires small regular assignments. And if I had to letter grade each one of them, I would not have enough time in the day. So it's a gift to myself. And also I think it's helpful to them.
Yeah. And also helpful to me because I think I borrowed that idea from one semester and it revolutionized my semester. All right, so Robert's question is here. I can read it off if you like. I'm setting out a digital humanities repository with Latinx and Mestizo communities in Southern Oregon. Many of the Hispanic immigrants are descendant of migrant labor, and that phrase about projects that visceralize the amount of labor really opened up a way to approach collecting data at this very early stage of the project.
I cannot, Trevor Munoz and Katie Rawson's work broadly is extraordinary. Any opportunity I have to read things that either one of them wrote or listen to them, I will jump on. But I especially like that piece because I think for a particular kind of data interlocutor who likes to come to big data sets after they're already created, there's this like chauvinism about the production of the data. And the production is in fact often more work. And it's where a lot of critical work happens. And I think that's another lesson that's like, students are always grouchy about how much time they spend transcribing things. And then at the end of the class, they're like, oh, right, I now understand like when somebody writes, the first person's first name is Leslie, I know I can be certain that was transcribed correctly. So they get there. And I know that they are frustrated when I say things like, you will come to discover that this is really helpful, but they usually do. I try not to like pull the like, I'm a grown-up and I'm telling you, but occasionally for like, at the end of the class, you'll appreciate this. They tend to be like, oh yes, I do.
Kind of going along those lines of kind of this, the students' work, I think your students have come up with really amazing ways to kind of carry this work forward, both in, data, additional data collection and also in kind of sharing of data. What has for you been the most kind of surprising outcome of like a student's kind of work on the project?
I think a thing that just happened this week is a student who took my class last year came to me, and she writes for the student newspaper and said, I'm trying to understand why the campus feels less safe. which I think means a number of things in this moment. And so I want to like think about data that's collected by the institution, but I also know that that data is really fraught. Can we just like come and talk about it? And this was like totally outside of class. She didn't need to come to my office hours to hang out and talk to me about this. But the fact that she had this question and she knew like it can be answered with data. There's also some stuff that's not represented. And how do I write about that responsively was just, it was really cool. It was a great, fun moment for me to see. I think that the thing that continues to be the most helpful for me is the research that students did about how knowing this story would not make them shy away from the college. I think I need to say that a lot to administrators, because I believe both that it would help the college as an institution, but I also think if we tell this story, it will make the college be less like students come expecting a level of safety that they're not getting. And that's a problem that is causing real and actual trauma for real and actual students. And it's a thing that we need to address. And so I think being able to point to students saying, this would make me trust you more, and it would also make me feel less betrayed when I came here, it's great that they are saying it, and I need to say it more, and a bunch of us need to say it more.
I want to open it up in case anyone has any additional questions or thoughts to add.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi, nothing really of value except to say how much I appreciate, the very generous sharing of big work and really challenging us as scholars and as, leaders on our campus to do this social justice work and really giving us very concrete tools to be able to bring that into the classroom in a very succinct way. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Teresa is also doing very incredible work on her campus. And so she's amazing. All of you should know about her too. And I think everyone does. So that's good.
Yes. I just want to second though what Teresa said, and thank you so much for sharing this. And I'm going to be that annoying person who asked the question that probably you're like, I don't want to talk about that. But you've taught the class 5 times now. Mm-hmm. You are likely going to teach it again. Do you see a place after kind of from your own perspective, because you do research in the 19th century and you do work in looking at donations and this kind of financial transaction, do you have a place where you see either the course branching off into a sister course or something like that, or do you see a place where it is informing your own work down the road?
So I definitely, a thing that I sort of gave very short shrift to in this talk is the fact that a lot of the conversations about this happening on college campuses are about campuses that were built with the exploitation of enslaved labor, like concretely, like the physical buildings. And so I really want to write something about sort of institutions like mine and like a lot of institutions where financially they were dependent on enslaved labor. And so to begin to flesh out that history, I think would be really helpful. So that is, I have to finish my book and it's due on January 1st. So I can't think about anything else until then, but that is on my list. I'm also very lucky because the Bates Mill Company archives have the disciplinary records of many of the women who worked in the mills. And it's like discipline for things like being out too late or like being seen with a man. And so at some point, I want to take this course and look at those records because the exploitation of their labor is also a part of Bates's history, and begin to explore that. The other thing that I think this course probably needs to do next is to think about where Bates is situated, like physically, and the land cessions that led to the main state seminary owning this land and what that means in terms of our relationship with the local Wabanaki and Abenaki. I don't have the expertise to teach that course, so I have to think about who my collaborators would be, but yes.
Lots you can do. And I'm so excited to kind of just learn more about this as it continues to grow. I just want to thank you so much for your time again and for your generous sharing of both just your pedagogy and your practice with us. We have, I'm wondering to see, Roopsie, do we have another speaker coming up after Anelise's talk?
Yes, December 15th, Tatiana Bryant, who's Director of Research, Learning, and Training at Barnard, will be doing a Q&A, like ask an expert kind of session. Tatiana's experience, she used to be at UC Riverside, lots of experience with librarianship and digital humanities, and working with faculty, working with students on how to do digital ethnic studies. And so this is a great opportunity to come and pick her brain. Also, if you're a librarian and want to pick her brain about the role of the librarians or other things librarians can do in the context of digital ethnic studies, also a wonderful opportunity.
Great. And kind of just really, I guess, piggybacking off of Anelise's talk today, the next meeting of the DEFCon reading group is going to be talking about blogging, classroom, and code. So if you enjoyed some of the conversations today, then definitely join us for that discussion on December 6th. And I think I'm going to close it out to for now, but if Anelise, if you have a couple minutes in case anyone has any lingering questions, we'd love to have you stick around. Thank you so much for everyone for coming out and being a part of this community. And thank you, Anelise, for your time. And can you just show us Max if he's there?
Oh,
give us that.
He's
asleep. Okay. I was going to leave you out with a warm, fuzzy feeling from Anelise's cutie.
My dog.
Yes.
My best collaborator.
And the only dog I said I would let my child have if you ever decided to part with them. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you, Jamila. Thank you, Annalisa. That was amazing.
Thank you, Ripsy. I hope you drive safely.
I am. Thank you. I am like an hour and 15 minutes from my house.
Yes. Amazing.
Wonderful. Yes.
Yeah, thank you
so
again. It's brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is a lot. I mean, just so I'm like encouraged and inspired. I want you to share that entire talk again once we get our CSUF fellows on board.